let's consider some other possibilities. So at this point, I'm not passing any value in here. I'm just saying drive, but it might be nice to be able to specify how far I want to go. So let's say this is essentially the default drive if I don't specify a number. Here's that method, but I want more flexibility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say public void drive. In other words, I'm going to add another method called drive. And the way that we tell the difference between these two methods, because they have the same name and the same return type and the same access specifier, is I'm going to put something in the parentheses, okay, which is to say I'm going to overload method drive by adding parameters. Okay, so we have the default version, if you will, of drive, and then the one with parameters. I'm going to call this distance. Okay, so that says when you call the method called drive from your car, you will specify how far you want to go as an integer. And again, we don't have fractional miles, so that's some number of miles. And then I'm going to say underscore mileage equals distance. And then I can actually make use of that by going back to main. And let's see, I guess we've decided we really don't need these anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And then I'm going to say pinto.drive. And as you can see now, I have the option of calling car.drive with no parentheses, or with no parameters in the parentheses, or one that takes distance. I usually see a 2 of 2. So I'm going to put a number in there. Let's say 123. So that will do what I need. And back out here a little bit. And then go ahead and do a console.writeLine of pinto.odometer. Okay, so now I've got the customized drive, and it says how far I went. Let's go ahead and run that code. And what we see here is, okay, driving good, I got 100 miles good. I set it up to 400, and now it's actually set back to 123, which is what I said I wanted, but is that really what the car should be doing? So let's actually revisit some of those operations. So if we go back to car, you'll see that what happens is mileage gets set to distance, and that's probably really not what I wanted. Probably what I wanted instead of setting was to increment mileage. In other words, make it bigger by some amount. All right, so this is actually a couple of different operators, a couple of different syntactical ways that we could do this. I'm going to do it in the simplest way possible for now, the way that I expect most people would have seen. I'm going to say mileage equals mileage plus distance. Okay, and really, if you think about drive, that's really true there. Every time I say drive, the odometer gets set back to 100, which isn't really what I want. What I really want to do is set mileage equal to 100 more than whatever it is, like so. All right, so in order to do that, I have to make sure that I know where I'm starting. And as it turns out, when you create a field of an integer type, this is automatically initialized to 0. So if you were to create a floating point number, it would be 0.0, or an integer is, of course, 0, or whatever 0 is for a given type, that's what it's going to do. So in this case, when you call drive, what it means is that you're going to make it 100 bigger than it was if you call the default version of drive. So now this is, I guess, the default version, like so. And then this is the overloaded version that has parameters. And again, when you call this, it's going to increment or make the mileage bigger by such and such an amount. So now when we run the code, as you can see, it's much more satisfactory. I'm driving, I have 100 miles, then I have 4,000 miles. Then when I call drive again with the parameter 123, it sets my odometer to 4,123. So that's working fine. Great. Let's consider another possibility, though. So I've got this this field here, and it's modified in Drive, and it's modified in the overload for Drive in pretty much the same way. And it turns out that I've got code that sort of does something like that already. It's not exactly the same, but it's sort of similar. And so rather than modifying or rather than accessing the field directly, what you might want to consider is using the properties to do that kind of work. And that way you don't have to worry about this situation here. Now here our code is so simple and we're always making it bigger. That's probably not going to happen. But you could imagine that the get code or the set code for a given property could get more and more complex, and it would be more and more important not to repeat that code each time. So what I'm going to do is, instead of accessing my private field from my methods, even the methods from within the class, I'm going to use the odometer, because that way I know for sure that any specialized manipulation of that field, to protect it, so to speak, has been accounted for, and I don't have to repeat the code. So instead of accessing mileage here, I'm going to access odometer, like so. Okay. So now we can actually see this is an example of calling both get and set for that particular field, because the set part, right, is the fact that odometer is on the left-hand side, and the get part is the fact that on the right-hand side I'm reading that value. In general, sort of as a rule of thumb, let me put this up here, use properties to access fields even in same class methods. In other words, the methods that are in the same class as the property. For data visible outside of the class. So in other words, you don't have to create a property for every field that you have. But if it is information that you're trying to export but be controlled about, it's a good idea to create a property to protect, for example here, it's a good idea to create a property to protect those fields. And if you add code to it, then it only makes sense to always make use of that. So even though I could say underscore mileage, I don't want to do that. I want to use the property that's more capable of dealing with the value of underscore mileage. It is also possible to create private properties. So in other words, there's nothing wrong with creating a private property to access a field if you have a number of lines of code that you might want to use to protect that field. If you have that situation, you're welcome to create private properties. But often they are public. Just want to tell you that that's certainly an option for you.